In a quiet village nestled in the Japanese countryside, there was a peculiar tale passed down through generations, a story that parents used to warn their children, the story of Hachishakusama, the 8-foot-tall woman. This spirit, as tall as she was malevolent, was known for her haunting presence and her ominous, deep voice that echoed through the night. A young boy named Hiroshi had heard the tale many times. His grandparents, with whom he spent every summer, were especially adamant about warning him. "Stay away from the old shrine on the outskirts of the village," his grandmother would say, her voice trembling. "That's where she lingers." One summer, when Hiroshi was 12, he decided to stay with his grandparents once again. The village was quiet, its streets lined with tall grass and old wooden houses. The nights were peaceful, filled with the sounds of cicadas and the distant rustling of leaves. But this summer felt different. There was a heavy, oppressive atmosphere in the air, and the villagers seemed more on edge than usual. One afternoon, while playing near the woods, Hiroshi spotted something strange in the distance. Among the trees stood a figure, tall, impossibly tall, with a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over its face. Curious, Hiroshi squinted, trying to make out the details. But before he could move closer, a sudden chill ran down his spine, and he heard it, a low, rhythmic sound, like a deep voice humming.
Po. Po. Po.
Hiroshi froze, his blood turning to ice. The figure began to move, slowly gliding through the trees, its unnaturally long limbs swaying with each step. He knew, in that moment, who, or what, he was seeing. It was Hachishakusama. Panic surged through him, and he bolted back to his grandparents' house, his heart pounding in his chest. When he burst through the door, pale and shaking, his grandmother immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened, Hiroshi?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I saw her," he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. "The tall woman. She was in the woods." His grandmother's face turned ashen. Without a word, she hurried to the phone and called a few of the village elders. Within minutes, they arrived at the house, their faces grave. "You mustn't leave the house," one of the elders said. "Not until we can protect you." They quickly set to work, placing bowls of salt in each corner of the room and covering the windows with old talismans. His grandfather lit incense, muttering prayers under his breath. The elders explained that once Hachishakusama set her sights on someone, she would follow them relentlessly, her haunting presence never far behind. She was known to take children, dragging them away to a fate no one ever returned from. "You must stay in your room tonight," his grandmother said, her voice trembling. "Do not answer to any voice, no matter what you hear. We'll be outside, keeping watch." Hiroshi nodded, fear gripping his heart. As night fell, he locked himself in his room, the eerie silence of the village weighing heavily on him. The talismans fluttered gently in the breeze, and the scent of incense filled the air. Despite the precautions, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, waiting for him. Hours passed, and the house remained quiet. Hiroshi tried to sleep, but every little noise made him jump. Then, just as he began to drift off, he heard it again.
Po. Po. Po.
His eyes snapped open. The sound was closer now, much closer, as if it was right outside his window. His heart raced as the deep, rhythmic voice filled the room, reverberating off the walls.
Po. Po. Po.
He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay quiet, to not move. But then, to his horror, he heard a soft knock on his window. "Hiroshi," a voice called. It was his grandmother's voice. "Hiroshi, it's safe now. You can come out." He hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to stay put. But the voice was so familiar, so comforting. He almost reached for the door when he remembered the elder's warning. Do not answer to any voice, no matter what you hear. With a trembling hand, he covered his ears and squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the sound. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and the voice became pleading. Hiroshi, open the door. It's me, your grandmother. But Hiroshi knew better. He stayed where he was, tears streaming down his face as the voice continued to call out to him. After what felt like hours, the knocking finally stopped, and the voice faded away. The next morning, when the elders and his grandparents opened the door, they found Hiroshi huddled in the corner, exhausted but alive. The talismans had turned black, and the salt in the bowls had dissolved into a murky liquid. The elders nodded solemnly, relieved that their protections had worked. You did well, Hiroshi, his grandmother said, hugging him tightly. You were brave. Hiroshi never saw Hachishakusama again, but the memory of that night stayed with him forever. The village returned to its quiet routine, but the tale of the 8-foot-tall woman was never forgotten. And every summer, when the wind rustled through the trees and the cicadas sang their eerie songs, Hiroshi would remind himself of the warning that had saved his life: never answer the call of Hachishakusama.